with these two diarists. I'm really overjoyed to introduce you to them. Can you hear me all right? Great. What? What? All right, okay. Right. Yeah, I read them 20 years ago and was incredibly affected by them. Just to give you a sort of, for those who aren't familiar with them, just to give you a very rough idea of them. Fritz Reck was a Prussian landowner who detested the military might of Prussia. He detested the way that industry had been co-opted by the Nazis, and he moved away and he went to live outside Munich. And this diary it's operatic in tone. I think he started it, or at least what survives is it started in 1936. And until his arrest, he was writing. His arrest was in October 44, and he died in Dachau. And any line of this text would have been enough to earn him a death sentence. I think he was so angry, so full of rage, that's what, in a sense, the tone is almost, as I said, operatic. I've left in two mentions of friends of his. One was a writer called Max Mohr, and the other one was Clemens von Frankenstein, who was the artistic director, I think, or the chairman of the Munich Opera House, the Royal Opera House. Etty is very different. Her tone is very different. Both of them had a very profound faith. She was Jewish, but I think she saw no distinction between the Old and the New Testament. And in fact, she says in her diary that she'll be taking the Gospels with her to the camp that she is eventually sent to. And what remains of Etty's writing are her diaries and her letters. I haven't included the letters because A, the tone is very different, and also because I'd started off with Reck, and therefore I wanted to keep them both as diaries. Her diary describes the arc of her travel from young, modern, emancipated, Jewish Dutch woman to being a woman who lived almost entirely in the spirit. And she decided, as you'll hear, that she didn't want to hide. She didn't want to run away. And so eventually she volunteered to accompany people to the deportation camp, which of course speeded up her own journey to Auschwitz. The very last thing she ever wrote, she threw a postcard out of a train saying, "We left singing." The three people that she refers to in this, you'll hear, are Julius Speer, who was the man who introduced her, or reintroduced her, if you like, to her faith. He was a Jungian psychologist. And her two friends, Werner and Liesel. I think that covers it. I would like to just say one more thing, and that is that tonight's reading, I would like to be in memory of my friend Susanna Stage. Thanks.
Nero's second burning. August 11, 1936. I happened to be in Munich recently. I couldn't get a room at my usual hotel near the station and found a place to sleep in the old city, opposite a school in which a visiting Hitler youth troop had been lodged for the holiday period. I saw one of these boys, who had just thrown off his knapsack, look about him at the empty classroom. I observed how his glance fell on the crucifix hanging behind the teacher's desk. How in an instant this young, still soft face contorted in fury. How he ripped this symbol, to which the cathedrals of Germany and the ringing progressions of the St. Matthew Passion are consecrated, off the wall and threw it out of the window into the streets with the cry, "Lie there, you dirty Jew!" My life in this pit will soon enter its 5th year. For more than 42 months, I have thought hate, have lain down with hate in my heart, dreamed hate, and awakened with hate. I suffocate in the knowledge that I am the prisoner of a horde of vicious apes. February 1941, Etty meets the psychologist Julius Speer.
9th of March, 1941. And there he was now, this complete stranger, this Julius Speer with his complicated face. There were lots of attractive women and girls at his lecture. I was touched by the almost palpable love he was shown by several Aryan girls. He, the Jew, who had fled from Berlin, who had come all the way from Germany to help them to find inner peace. In the corridor stood a slender young girl. As he passed, it was the interval, Speer exchanged a few words with her, and she gave him a smile so charged with devotion, so obviously from the very depths of her soul, and so intense that it almost hurt me. 15th of March, 9:30 a.m. Yesterday afternoon, Speer and I read over the notes that he'd given me. And when we came to the words, "If there were only one human being worthy of the name, then we should be justified in believing in humanity," I threw my arms around him on a sudden impulse. It's a problem of our age. Hatred of Germans poisons everyone's mind. Let the bastards drown. That's the lot of them. Such sentiments have become part and parcel of our daily speech. Until suddenly, a few weeks ago, I had a liberating thought. If there were only one decent German, then he should be cherished. Despite that whole barbaric gang, and because of that one decent German, it's wrong to pour hatred over an entire people. Indiscriminate hatred is the worst thing there is. It's a sickness of the soul. Hatred doesn't lie in my nature. If things were to come to such a pass that I began to hate people, then I would know that my soul was sick. I have recently made it my business to preserve harmony in this household of so many conflicting elements. Kathy, a German peasant woman, a Christian woman, Maria, who's been a second mother to me, a Jewish girl student from Amsterdam, an old, level-headed social democrat, Han, Bernard the Philistine, and an upright young economics student. But sometimes when I read the papers or hear reports of what's happening, I'm suddenly beside myself with anger, cursing and swearing at the Germans. Sometimes I just can't bear it. The whole nation must be destroyed, root and branch. And then I say, nastily, they're all scum. And at the same time, I feel terribly ashamed. But I can't stop, even though I know it's all wrong. Speer is completely mine now. Even if he were to leave for China tomorrow, I feel him round me, and I live in his aura. But I no longer sit about desperately counting the days as I did before. And I no longer ask Han, do you still love me? Do you still think I'm special? Or are you sure I'm still your favorite? That too was a kind of clinging, a physical clinging to what can never be physical. Now, I live and breathe through my soul.
The 11th of August, 1936. I saw Hitler last in Seabrook, slowly gliding by in a car with armor-plated sides, while an armed bodyguard of motorcyclists rode in front as further protection. A jelly-like, slag-grey face, a moon face into which two melancholy jet-black eyes had been set like raisins. I'm not a mystic. I'm a child of my time, despite all forebodings, and I hold strictly to what I see. What I saw gliding by there, like the Prince of Darkness himself, was no human being. I used to ride at the Munich Armory, after which I liked to eat at the Löwenbräu Keller. That was the second meeting. At first glance, the tightly clenched insecurity seemed to be gone, which allowed him to launch at once into one of his tirades. I had poured out over me every one of the political platitudes in his book, that Machiavellianism by which German foreign policy became a series of legalized burglaries, and the activity of its leaders a succession of embezzlements, forgeries, and treaty breaches. With his oily hair falling into his face as he ranted, he had the look of a man trying to seduce the cook.
March 25th, 1941. Bonga is dead. De Braak, Duperron, Marsman, all are dead. And many others are in concentration camps. I shall never forget Bonga. It was a few hours before the Dutch capitulation, and suddenly there was the heavy, cumbersome, unmistakable figure of Bonga, shuffling along, blue-tinted glasses, singular, heavy head tilted to one side. This image, the clumsy figure with neck craned and head tilted at the distant clouds of smoke, is something I'll never forget. On an impulse, I ran, coatless, out through the doors behind him, caught up with him and said, "Hello, hello, Professor Bonga. I've thought a lot about you these last few days. May I walk a little way with you?" And he gave me a sidelong look through those blue glasses, and obviously had no idea who I was, despite 2 exams and a year sat in his lectures. Still, those days, people felt so close to one another that I just continued walking by his side. I can't remember the precise words we exchanged. It was that afternoon when people thought of nothing but getting away to England, and I asked, "Do you think it makes sense to escape?" And he said, "The young have to stay put." And I, "Do you think democracy can win?" And he, "It's bound to win." but it's going to cost us several generations. And he, fearless Bonga, was suddenly as defenseless as a child. And so with my arm round him, we walked on. He seemed a broken man and good through and through. All the passion and fire in him had been doused. My heart overflows when I think of how he was that afternoon. He, the college tyrant. And at Jan Willem Brouwer's Square, I took my leave of him. I stood in front of him, took one of his hands between mine, and he gently lowered his heavy head a little and looked at me through his blue glasses, which hid his eyes, and sounded almost like a stage comic as he said, "My pleasure." The next evening, at Becca's, the first thing I heard was, "Bonga is dead." "But that's impossible. I spoke to him last night at 7 o'clock. And Becca said, "Then you must have been one of the last people to speak to him. He put a bullet through his brain at 8 o'clock.
"11th of August, 1936. There he sat, a raw vegetable Genghis Khan, a teetotaling Alexander, a womanless Napoleon, an effigy of Bismarck, who would certainly have had to go to bed for 4 weeks if he'd ever tried to eat just one of Bismarck's breakfasts. I had driven into town, and since at that time, September 1932, the streets were already quite unsafe, I had a loaded revolver with me. In the almost deserted restaurant, I could easily have shot him. If I had an inkling of the role this piece of filth was to play, of the years of suffering he was to make us endure, I would have done it without a second thought. But I took him for a character out of a comic strip and did not shoot. It would have done no good in any case. Our martyrdom had already been decided. If Hitler at that point had been tied to a railway track, the train would have been derailed before it got to him. But when his hour strikes, the end will come down upon his head from every possible direction and from places never even thought of. There are many rumors of attempts to assassinate him. The attempts fail, and they will continue to fail. For years, it has seemed that God is asleep.
The 14th of June, 1941. More arrests, more terror, concentration camps, the arbitrary dragging off of fathers, sisters, brothers. We seek the meaning of life, wondering whether any meaning can be left. 4th of August, 1941. Do I love Speer? Yes, madly. Well, as a man, no, not as a man, but as a human being. Or perhaps it's more his warmth, his love, and his striving after goodness that I love. No, I can't work it out. It's difficult to be on equally good terms with God and your body. This thought keeps haunting me. At a musical soiree the other evening, when Speer was with me, there's something complicated about Speer. He just sits there, full of warmth and human kindness, in which you bask, this great big man sitting there with his large, sensitive hands that reach out for you now and again, and eyes whose caress can be truly heartrending. But the caress is impersonal, of course. He caresses the human being, not the woman. And the woman wants to be caressed as a woman, not as a human being. At least that's how I feel at times. 24th of August, 1941. There's a really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. I imagine there are people who pray with their eyes turned heavenward. They seek God outside themselves. And there are those who bow their head and bury it in their hands. I think these seek God inside.
May 1937. I am writing this in a Berlin hotel, which is about as quiet and discreet as a howitzer. Pondering the great changes of the 19th century, I realized that the moment, 70 years ago, when Germany, in its infatuation with prosperity, agreed to let Prussia be its organizer and procurer, it went to the dogs. Prussia is a state patched together out of bits and pieces. It was never intended to be a nation. To hold together the monstrous structure, the Prussians had to put all their energies into their military machine. As a result, no middle class and no true caste of the learned could ever come into being. Here, then, is where the preference for the provisional and second rate was born. This is where the eternal more originated, and the deification of the threadbare, the cult of the ugly. This is the place where the eye-bulging hatred against everybody who had more originated, the ceaseless eyeing of other people's prosperity, the readiness to sudden banditry, and the drive to make this Prussian cult of the threadbare into the state religion of Germany. And they will, if other people prove recalcitrant, use their guns. And here, I touch on the central political problem affecting Europe today. After the Prussian oligarchy disappeared, the men of Versailles were guilty of the incredible stupidity of dismembering Austria. After that, all that was needed was for Prussian greed to combine with the political condottieri, and the catastrophe which all of us knew was in the making was upon us. This may be a German problem today, but tomorrow it will be a matter for Europe and the world to resolve. The time is fast approaching that Europe will have to decide whether it will let itself be engulfed or will finally defend its own heart from the Prussian drive for power. 9th of September, 1937. My friends have taken the occasion to give me warning about my own writings. Night after night I hide this record deep in the woods on my own land, constantly on the watch lest I'm observed, constantly changing my hiding place. And this is how we live, my vanished friends. Do you, who left Germany 4 or more years ago, have any idea of how completely without legal status we are? Or what it is to be threatened with denunciation at any time? Will you actually be able to understand that flight was more comfortable than remaining at the dangerous outpost, an illegal watcher among the barbarians? Will you be able to grasp what it has meant to spend these long years with a heart filled with hate? Hate at lying down and hate at rising, hate through the long hours of bad dreams, and all of this without rights under the law. Will we still speak the same language when this is over? Will you grasp that the death-like loneliness of our lives and the misery-laden air of the catacombs we have been breathing for so long have made our eyes terribly clear-sighted? May it not be in the first moments after your return that the visions these eyes can now see in the distance will frighten you? We live in a gigantic spiritual vacuum. What are the words, "the end of the world is at hand," which Dostoevsky wrote 70 years ago, but a presentiment of the apocalyptic horseman now thundering down upon us, and a prophecy of how utterly lost we have become? Truly, Dostoevsky is right. The end of the world is at hand.
October 6th, 1941. Last night, I asked Han in bed, "Do you think someone like me ought to get married? Am I a real woman? Sex for me isn't all that important, although sometimes I give the impression that it is. But isn't it cheating to allow men to be taken in by that impression and then be unable to give them what they want? I'm not really an earthy woman, at least not sexually. My primitive physical passion has been diverted. I have a sort of primitive love and primitive sympathy for people, for all people. I don't think I'm cut out for one man. Nor can I be faithful to one man, not because of other men, but because I myself am made up of so many people. I'm now 27, and it feels as if I've had my fill of loving and being loved by men. I feel very, very old. It's no accident that the man I've been living with these past 5 years is of an age that precludes any common future, and that my best friend, Speer, plans to marry somebody else. 20th of March, 1938, the Anschluss.
And now, Austria. We've seen it coming for weeks. Naturally, we sensed what it all meant, these threats and staged riots, the whole shabby performance designed to provide an excuse for intervention. I see in this generalized brutality, this nasty satisfaction over the fate of the Austrian leaders, this general delight in ridicule and rape, something ignoble which makes me deeply ashamed. Austria, poor, eternally derided Austria, whose only sin was that until the end, and in the face of the attack by Greater Prussia, it held to a last recollection of the noble old Holy Roman Empire. Why in the world did Schuschnigg not give the order to shoot, in one last attempt to awaken the rest of the world from its incomprehensible lethargy? I foresee a day when the nations will regret their cowardly passivity. The cost is beyond measuring, but they will have to pay someday. So, what did everybody do? They stood by and watched, and thus made impossible any resistance from inside Germany. As I write, an immense flight of bombers is droning past overhead. For a whole hour, the drone has gone on above, as though those planes were flying against a world power. I am a German. I encircle this land in which I live with all my love. Never again can I be torn from here without going to seed. I tremble for each tree and each wood that disappears, for each silent valley that is devastated, for each stream that these pirates of industry, the real masters of our land, threaten. You up there! I hate you, waking and sleeping. I will hate and curse you in the hour of my death. I will hate and curse you from my grave, and it will be your children and your children's children who will have to bear my curse. This I know, that a man must hate this Germany with all his heart if he really loves it. I would 10 times rather die than see you triumph. I'm crying, but more out of fury and shame than sadness.
24th of November 1941. Last night, cycling through cold, dark Larissa Strat, I babbled something like this. God, take me by your hand. I'll follow you dutifully and not resist too much. I'll evade none of the tempests that life has in store for me. I'll try to face it as best I can, but now and then, grant me a short respite. I delight in warmth and security, but I shan't rebel if I have to suffer cold, should you so decree. I'll follow wherever your hand leads me, and shall try not to be afraid. September 1938, Munich and the Czech crisis.
Everything indicates that Europe will look on and do nothing, as in the attack on Austria. And so Hitler's position will be further strengthened. We, who are not the worst of the Germans, must now pin our hopes on a war to free us as of a plague. It depends on whether or not one recognizes this regime, born in chicanery, blackmail, and swindle, as a legitimate government. I have, since the 30th of January 1933, never ceased to view it as criminal. November 9th, 1938. Kristin.
Late November 1941. It's as if my relationship with Speer had suddenly changed, as if I'd finally wrenched myself clear of him, when I'd imagined myself perfectly free all along. I felt it deep inside me. My life must be completely independent. I don't know what it is, a sudden sense of complete emancipation, of continuing all by myself. Last night on the cold bicycle ride, in a sudden flash of insight, I understood the depth of the intensity, the commitment I have made to this man and his work and his life. He has become an inseparable part of me. And with this new part of me, I must now go on, but alone. End of December, 1941. Last night, shortly before going to bed, I suddenly went down on my knees in the middle of the large room between the two steel chairs and the matting, forced to the ground by something stronger than myself. A patient once said to Speer, I sometimes have the feeling that God is right inside me. For instance, when I hear the St. Matthew Passion, and Speer said something like, at such moments, you are completely at one with the creative and cosmic forces that are at work in every human being. And these creative forces are ultimately part of God.
December 1938. I rack my brains to discover the meaning of this persecution of the Jews which Goebbels has instigated. At a time when the regime still urgently needed peace, surely this must call forth the deadly enmity of the whole world and make war inevitable. April 1939. Max Moore is dead. A light goes out, and then another. Finally, the theater is dark, and the stage, where all was light and animation only a short time before, is empty. Every now and then, an icy wind sweeps out of the dark room behind onto the stage. Courage is required to go on living now. Courage and a daily summoning up of one's will. for years now, to go on living has been to go on hating.
August 23rd, 1939, signing of the Russo-German non-aggression plan.
August. I have hated you in every hour that has gone by. I hate you so that I would happily give my life for your death and happily go to my own doom if only I could witness yours, take you with me into the depths. When I let this hate go free, I'm almost overcome by it. Let no one fool himself about the power of such hatred. Hate is the father of action. The way out of our defiled and desecrated house is through the command to hate Satan. Only thus will we earn the right to search in the darkness for the way of love.
Late December 1941. Speer once said to me that it took quite a long time before he dared say God without feeling there was something ridiculous about it, even though he was himself a believer. I know the intimate gestures he uses with women, but I still want to know the gestures he uses with God. He prays every night. Does he kneel down in the middle of his small room? Does he bury his heavy head in his great good hands? And what does he say? This morning, in the grey dawn, in a fit of nervous agitation, I suddenly found myself on the floor between Han's stripped bed and his typewriter, huddled up, my head on the ground. And when Han came in and seemed a bit taken aback by the spectacle, I told him that I was looking for a button, but it was a lie. Spring 1940, the fall of France, Holland, Belgium, Denmark, Norway.
October 1940. Every nation normally puts its demons, its delusions, its impossible desires away into the cellars and vaults and underground prisons of its unconscious. The Germans have reversed the process and have let them loose. The contents have escaped like the winds out of Pandora's box. A storm is raging across this long-suffering old earth. Germany, drunk with victory, is sick. And behind it all are the deals. People sell stolen paintings and sculptures and wine cellars. They deal in securities, silk stockings, ownerless French factories, with stolen machines, with soup spoons, toilet soap, and rubber goods. In Berlin, absolutely everybody deals. This is Germany today. Industry pulls the strings. The instrument of power is terror, and the industrialists hold tight to it. They control every means of influencing public opinion and have thereby stupefied the mass to the point of idiocy. It should be observed that my own point of view is that of a conservative, and further observed that between this viewpoint and that of the nationalists is a chasm as wide as a can. To be a conservative means to be a believer in the immutable laws of this old earth. This earth that will begin to shake and quake when the day comes to cleanse itself of all this filth. I am required to deify this Reich. I am supposed to sing in praise of deceit, of murder, of treaty breaking. And I'm supposed to join in the shrieks, the jubilant shouts as the enemy falls like a torch from his exploding aeroplane. In a Berlin cinema recently, I saw the newsreel in which Hitler, standing in front of the historic railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, receives the news of the capitulation of France, and then begins to dance on one foot like an Indian. I have never been so ashamed of my countrymen as I was there in that cinema, surrounded by the clamor of a mob in ecstasy at the sight of its hopping fury. I stood up and left. I was supposed to do that hopping filth the honor of applauding it. If I had given any clearer expression to what I was really thinking, I would very likely have been lynched. What price a forest if the national interest calls for a factory, or a German cathedral that stands in the way of an autobahn? Of course, I.G. Farben welcomed Hitler. He provided their poison factory with the aura of a philosophy. Nationalism, a state of mind in which you do not love your own country as much as you hate somebody else's. Under its aegis, morality decays, ancient customs die out. Men are uprooted, the steadfast derided, the thoughtful branded, the rivers poisoned, and the forests destroyed.
German invasion of Russia, 22nd June 1941.
I have a tenuous contact with the German embassy in Moscow, and I knew, therefore, what had to come and what now has come. Never did a people tumble more helplessly, more stupidly into catastrophe. The stupid, arrogant view of the Russians as Hottentots is the first basic mistake. The second is the incredible underestimation of the distances involved. But worst of all is the underestimation of the strange Slavic soul, only now beginning to be awakened, still haunted by awful nightmares. With this war, we come at last to that moment in history when, for the first time, the Slavic world directly confronts the Western. In their immense vanity, Satan's own have overreached themselves, and now they are in the net, and they will never free themselves again. That is the fact, and it rejoices my heart. I hate you. I hate you waking and sleeping. I hate you for undoing men's souls and for spoiling their lives. I hate you as the sworn enemy of the laughter of men. Oh, it is God's deadly enemy which I see and hate in you. In every one of your speeches, you make a mockery of the Spirit, which you have silenced, and you forget that the private thought, the thought born in sorrow and loneliness, can be more deadly than all your implements of torture. You threaten all who oppose you with death, but you forget our hatred is a deadly poison. It will creep into your blood, and we will die shouting with joy when your hate pulls you down with us into the depths. If you banish God from the earth, we will meet him under the earth, and then we, the underground men, will sing a song to God, who is joy. No good can come of this cloud of victories with the stink of crime. No good to a country whose foundations are propaganda and treason. No good to a people who takes its oath to criminals and is ready to make its contract with Satan. No, the devil's price merely goes up and up. January 1942. Recently, on a walk through the frozen woods, I found a starving fawn that had been torn by a dog. I took it home, fatally wounded as it was, but it died in my arms. Died with tears in its eyes and the look of endless sadness. An indictment of the Creator for allowing one of his creatures to suffer so.
February 1942. Somebody else was martyred today. That gentle boy from Cultura Bookshop. What is it in human beings that makes them want to destroy others? Jan asked. I said, the rottenness is in us too. That seems the only lesson to be learnt from this war, that we must look into ourselves and nowhere else. Our professors are in prison. Another of Jan's friends has been killed. but all we said to each other was, "It's too easy to feel vindictive."
March 1942. Thoughts after reading Heine on Germany. Christianity tempered somewhat the brutality of the Germanic delight in war, but if the day comes when that moderating symbol, the cross, loses its power, the senseless berserk rage of which the Nordic poets write will break loose again. Then the old stone gods will step out of the ruins and rub the dust of 1,000 years out of their eyes, and then Thor will spring forth, raising his mighty hammer, and smash into nothingness the Gothic cathedrals.
Early March 1942. We're not allowed to walk along the promenade any longer, and every miserable little clump of 2 or 3 trees has been pronounced a wood with a board nailed up. No admittance to Jews. More and more of these boards are appearing all over the place. Nevertheless, there is still enough room to move and live and be happy and play music and love each other. Somewhere, deep inside, all of us carry a vast and fruitful loneliness wherever we go. And sometimes the most important thing in a whole day is the rest we take between 2 deep breaths, or the turning inward in prayer for 5 short minutes. All disasters stem from us. I believe I will never be able to hate any human being, but I shall only hate the evil that is within me. Good Friday. Last night at 10:30, when I came back to my little room, where the curtains at the one large window are always left open, there it stood, my poor, ravished, lovely tree. A hesitant star climbed up its austere body, rested for a moment in the crook of one of its limbs, and then lost itself in the wide sky, no longer caught up in the branches. The Rijksmuseum looked like a turreted city far away. A desire to kneel down sometimes pulses through my body. Sometimes, in moments of deep gratitude, kneeling down becomes an overwhelming urge. Head deeply bowed, hands before my face. It's become a gesture embedded in my body, needing to be expressed from time to time. And I remember the girl who could not kneel and the rough coconut matting in the bathroom. When I write these things down, I still feel a little ashamed, as if I were writing about the most intimate of matters, much more bashful than if I had to write about my love life. But is there indeed anything as intimate as our relationship to God? 15th of April, 1942. I still have that length of gypsy material in my wardrobe. With Liesel's help, I shall make a dress from it, open on all sides to the sun, the wind, and his caresses. And then in the summer, the heath, and in the gypsy dress, with tanned bare legs and flowing gypsy hair, and then a small farmhouse with a low-beamed ceiling and the smell of apples, and a view over the heath at night. 16th of April, 1942. That Monday, that Easter Monday, Liesel and Werner at 2 o'clock in the morning, like two Parisian street urchins, sitting on the edge of their improvised gypsy beds in the living room, and me in Renata's bed. I took the blackout paper down from the window, and suddenly, there are 2 stars at the head of the bed. They were not the same stars I see from my window, but I felt in touch with them all the same. I see, I'm quite certain that no matter where I was in the world, I will always see stars. And on this rich, oh so rich Easter Monday, these were probably the 2 things that mattered most of all. The house that reached out to me and showed its face, and those 2 stars at 2 o'clock in the morning. 26th of April. Just a small red faded anemone. But I like the idea that in years to come I shall chance upon it again between these pages. And I shall say, look, this is the anemone I wore in my hair on the 55th birthday of the man who was the greatest and most unforgettable friend of my youth. It was during the 3rd year of World War II. We ate under-the-counter macaroni and drank real coffee. We were all in such high spirits, wondering if the war would be over soon, and I wore the red anemone in my hair, and somebody said, you look like a mixture of a Russian and a Spanish person. And somebody else said, a Russian Carmen. And when it was all over, we walked back through the familiar streets of South Amsterdam and climbed up to his roof garden. And Liesel had run ahead and put on a dress of shiny black silk with full sleeves of a translucent sky blue. And Han looked so natty and go ahead, and his card at table bore the inscription, eternally youthful lover, father of heroines. Liesel said to me later, I could fall in love with that man. 29th of April. Never give up. Never escape. Take everything in, perhaps suffer, but never, never give up.
June 1942. Clay is dying. I went home deeply alone, unutterably impoverished. It's as though all the light has gone out of the world. It's as though our lives are an ebbing tide that recedes further and further down a sandbank, and you think the tide will never come back again, ever in your life. It's as though the sun has become smaller, as though, one by one, the stars are going out. 30th of October, 1942. I watched the first bombing of Munich from a hotel room in Etty. A hideous red glare, transforming the autumn night and its full moon. I heard in the distance the muffled booms. It was calculated it had taken 3 minutes for the sound to carry, 3 minutes during which the victims at the scene had been gasping and gagging and dying. And finally, the whole of the sky to the west was a gigantic sheet of fire. Yesterday, I was discussing with a friend the changing forms of man's cruelty, with particular reference to the horror that the Eastern Front has now become. He has just come back from there and witnessed the massacre at K, where 30,000 Jews were slaughtered. This was done in a single day, in the space of an hour, perhaps. And when machine gun bullets gave out, flamethrowers were used. Spectators hurried to the event from all over the city, off-duty troops, young fellows with the milk complexions of the young. Oh, degradation. O life without honor, O thin shell that separates us from the lost souls in whom Satan burns. You judge us and find us wanting, and we here suffer in loneliness and dread. You point at us and at our lack of resistance, and we know that those who resisted have died unknown in filthy bunkers, and that the blood of martyrs has been spilled to no purpose, that deeds have been done and never heard of. The devil is loose, and it is God himself who has unloosed him. But still the night lies black over our heads, and we suffer. We suffer as you never shall suffer, no, not on your deathbed. Beware the man who would make light of our suffering.
28th of April, 1942. At 8:45, I dropped in to see Liesl and Werner. Werner sat by the coffee grinder in the corner of the kitchen, his gypsy face staring out defiantly above the yellow star. In its special honour, he had bought 2 pounds of real coffee beans that afternoon, which must have cost him a whole week's wages. And then we flopped into armchairs and with the steaming black coffee before us reflected a bit on the Middle Ages and on history and yellow stars and psychology. In the years to come, children will be taught about ghettos and yellow stars and terror at school, and it'll make their hair stand on end. But parallel with that textbook history, there also runs another. A cup of coffee, a few good friends, a happy atmosphere, and a little philosophizing, and life being beautiful and worthwhile all the same, or at least that was what I was bold enough to proclaim. We were so contented, the three of us together that night, the very night on which the Yellow Star was issued. I told them about the man in Beethovenstraat that afternoon. I looked at him as one might at the first crocus in spring, with pure enchantment. He was wearing a huge golden star, wearing it triumphantly on his chest. He was a procession and a demonstration all by himself as he cycled along so happily. And all that yellow, I suddenly had a poetic vision of the sun rising above him. So radiant and smiling did he look. I have matured enough to assume my destiny, to cease living an accidental life. The 18th of May, 1942. The threat grows greater and terror increases from day to day. I draw prayer around me like a dark protective wall, withdraw inside it as one might into a convent cell. The 9th of June. And now, Jews may no longer visit greengrocers' shops. They will soon have to hand in their bicycles. They may no longer travel by train, and they must be off the streets by 8 o'clock at night. 13th of June. This morning, I cycled along the station quay, enjoying the broad sweep of the sky at the edge of the city and breathing in the fresh, unrationed air. And everywhere signs, barring Jews from the paths and the open country. But above the one narrow path still left to us stretches the sky, intact. They can't do anything to us. They really can't. They can harass us, they can rob us of our material goods, of our freedom of movement, but we ourselves forfeit our greatest assets by our misguided compliance, by our feelings of being persecuted, humiliated and oppressed, by our own hatred, by our swagger, which hides our fear. I find life beautiful, and I feel free. The sky within me is as wide as the one stretching above my head. I believe in God, and I believe in mankind. 27th of June. The latest news is that all Jews will be transported out of Holland through the Drenthe province and then on to Poland. And the English radio has reported that 700,000 Jews perished last year alone in Germany and the occupied territories. And even if we stay alive, we shall carry the wounds with us throughout our lives. And yet I don't think life is meaningless. And God is not accountable to us for the senseless harm we cause one another. I have already died 1,000 deaths in 1,000 concentration camps. In one way, I know it all. And yet I find life beautiful and meaningful from minute to minute. 1st of July, 3:45 in the afternoon. Sun on the balcony and a light breeze through the jasmine. I can't take in how beautiful this jasmine is. But there's no need to. It's enough simply to believe in miracles in the 20th century. And I do, even though the lice will be eating me up in Poland before long. It's possible to suffer with dignity and without. I mean, most of us in the West don't understand the art of suffering and experience 1,000 fears instead. We cease to be alive, being full of fear, bitterness, hatred, despair. God knows it's only too easy to understand why. But when we are deprived of our lives, are we really deprived of very much? We have to accept death as part of life, even the most horrible of deaths. Don't we live an entire life, each one of our days? And does it really matter if we live a few days more or less? I'm in Poland every day on the battlefields, if that's what one can call them. I often see visions of poisonous green smoke. I'm with the hungry, with the ill-treated and the dying every day. But I'm also with the jasmine and with that piece of sky beyond my window. There's room for everything in a single life, for belief in God and for a miserable end. When I say I've come to terms with life, I don't mean that I've lost hope. What I feel is not hopelessness, far from it. I have lived this life 1,000 times, 1,000 times over already, and I have died 1,000 deaths. It's a question of living life from minute to minute and taking suffering into the bargain. Suffering has always been with us. Does it really matter in what form it comes? All that matters is how we bear it.
March 1943. This is how we live now, underground and illegally, open at any moment to denunciation and the executioner's axe. The courts, presided over by bloodthirsty Nazi Jacobins, make quick work of sentencing people to death, and 5-minute trials suffice. Stamped on the verdict order are liquidate and expropriate, which means execution and seizure of all property.
The 3rd of July, 1942. What is at stake is our impending destruction and annihilation. We can have no more illusions about that. They're out to destroy us completely. We must accept that and go on from there. Today I was filled with terrible despair, and I shall have to come to terms with that as well. Why this mood at this particular moment? Is it because I have a blister on my foot from walking through the hot town? Because so many people have had sore feet ever since they were stopped from using the trams? Because Liesl stood in a queue and didn't get any vegetables after all? Oh, it's for all those reasons. There's an awful lot of reasons, all of them petty in themselves, but all of them part of the great campaign to destroy us. The reality of death has become a definite part of my life. My life has, so to speak, been extended by death, by my looking death in the eye and accepting it, by accepting destruction as part of life and no longer wasting my energies on fear of death or the refusal to acknowledge its inevitability. It sounds paradoxical. By excluding death from our life, we cannot live a full life. And by admitting death into our life, we enlarge and enrich it. This has been my first real confrontation with death. I never knew what it was before. If this day has brought me nothing else, then I'm nevertheless grateful for that kosher German soldier at the kiosk with his bag of carrots and cauliflowers. First, he pushed that note into Liesl's hand on the tram, and then came the letter that I had to read and reread. She reminded him so much of the late rabbi's daughter, whom he had nursed on her deathbed for days and nights on end. And tonight, he's paying a visit. And when Liesl told me all this, I knew at once, I will pray for this German soldier. Out of all those uniforms, one has been given a face now. There will be other faces too, in which we shall be able to read something we understand, that German soldiers suffer as well. The 4th of July. Every pretty blouse I put on is a kind of celebration. And so is every occasion I have to wash with scented soap in a bathroom all to myself for half an hour. It's as if I were reveling in these civilized luxuries for the last time. But even if I have to forgo them one day, I shall always know that they exist. 10 p.m. Just one more thing. Every minute of this day seems one great gift and consolation, a memory I shall carry within me as an ever-present reality. We must count neither on being preserved nor on being destroyed. What matters are the concerns of daily life. Last night we talked about the labour camps. I said I don't have any illusions about them. I know that I'll be dead within 3 days. Liesl said, I have a feeling that I'll come through. I can sympathise with that feeling. I used to have it myself, a feeling of indestructible resilience. And I still have it now, but no longer in a purely material sense. The main thing is that even as we die a terrible death, we are able to feel right up to the very last moment that life has meaning and beauty, that we have realized our potential and lived a good life.
"20th of August, 1943. The news from Hamburg is simply beyond the grasp of the imagination. Streets of boiling asphalt into which the victims sank and were boiled alive. Veritable cities of ruins, which cover the dead and surround those still alive like some jagged stone martyr's crown. The talk is of 200,000 dead. I'm not one who believes everything is told. I much prefer seeing things for myself. And this is what I saw on a burning hot day in early August at a little railway station in Upper Bavaria, where 40 or 50 of these miserable people were milling about, scrambling despite the angry roars of the station master into a carriage through a window they had broken. What happened was inevitable. A suitcase, a miserable lump of cardboard, missed the target, fell back to the platform, and broke open. There was a pile of clothes, a manicure kit, a toy. And there was the corpse of a child, shrunk to the proportions of a mummy, which the half-crazed woman had dragged along with her, the macabre remains of what only a few days before had been a family.
The 5th of July. All that matters now is to be kind to each other, with all the goodness that is in us. And every encounter is also a farewell. 7th of July. You must learn to forego all personal desires and to surrender completely. And surrender doesn't mean giving up the ghost, fading away with grief, but offering what little assistance I can wherever it has pleased God to place me. Oh, I feel so strange, as if I were floating on air. 9th of July. Such words as God and death and suffering and eternity are best forgotten. We have to become as simple and as wordless as the growing corn or the falling rain. We must just be. When I tell others fleeing or hiding is pointless, there's no escape, so let's just do what we can for others, it sounds too much like defeatism, like something I don't mean at all. I can't find the right words either for that radiant feeling inside me which encompasses but is untouched by all the suffering and all the violence. 10th of July. A hard day. A very hard day. We must learn to shoulder our common fate. Everyone who seeks to save himself must surely realize that if he does not go, another must take his place. And is it as if it really mattered which of us goes? Ours is now a common destiny, and that is something we must not forget. A very hard day. But I keep finding myself in prayer. And that is something I shall always be able to do, even in the smallest space. Pray. Spear's quivering mouth when he said, Adri and Dickie won't be allowed to bring me my food anymore. The 11th of July. But how shall I really feel, I keep wondering, with a call-up card for Germany in my bag and orders to leave in a week's time? Well, supposing the card came tomorrow, how would I act then? I would have my hair cut short and throw my lipsticks away. I would try to finish reading the Rilke letters before the week was out. I'd have a pair of trousers and a jacket made of that heavy winter coat material, and every spare minute I would want to write to him, to Speer, the man I shall always long for. Yes, when I think about having to leave him and never being able to know what's happening to him, I feel as if I were dying already. Many accuse me of passivity when I refuse to go into hiding. They say that I've given up. They say everyone who can must try to stay out of their clutches. The funny thing is, I don't feel I'm in their clutches anyway, whether I stay or am sent away. I don't feel in anyone's clutches. I feel safe in God's arms. And no matter whether I'm sitting in this beloved old desk now, or in a bare room in the Jewish district, or perhaps in a labor camp under SS guards in a month's time, I shall always feel safe in God's arms. And if I should not survive, how I die will show me who I really am. The 20th of July, the July 44 plot.
21st of July, 1944. And now the attempt to assassinate Hitler, carried out by Count von Stauffenberg. Behind it, a revolt of the generals, long awaited. Now really, gentlemen, this is a little late. You made this monster, and as long as things were going well, you gave him whatever he wanted. You turned Germany over to this arch-criminal. You swore allegiance to him by every incredible oath he chose to put before you, all of you. And now you are betraying him. As yesterday you betrayed the Republic, and as the day before yesterday you betrayed the monarchy. Oh, I don't doubt that if this coup had succeeded, we would have been saved. I am sorry, the whole nation is sorry that you failed. But to think that you, while the embodiment of the Prussian heresy, that sower of evil, that stench in the nostrils of humanity, that you may be Germany's future leaders? No.
12th of July, 1942, morning prayer. Last night, for the first time, I lay in the dark with burning eyes. As scene after scene of human suffering passed before me. I shall promise you one thing, God, just one very small thing. I shall never burden my today with cares about my tomorrow, although that takes some practice. Each day is sufficient unto itself. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the last. My battles are fought out inside with my own demons. It's not in my nature to tilt against the savage, cold-blooded fanatics who clamour for our destruction. I'm not afraid of them either. I don't know why. I'm so calm. It's sometimes as if I were standing on the parapets of the Palace of History, looking down over far distant lands. But sometimes I feel as if layers of ash were being sprinkled over my heart, as if my face were withering and decaying before my eyes, and as if everything were falling apart in front of me, and my heart was letting everything go. But these are brief moments, and I can once more stand up to this piece of history that is ours. I hate nobody. I am not embittered. And once the love of mankind has germinated in you, it will grow without measure. The greatest cause of suffering in so many of our people is their utter lack of inner preparation. They believe our fate is sealed already, our catastrophe complete. Really, Dante's Inferno is comic opera by comparison.
On the 15th of July, 1942, Etty was given a job at the Cultural Affairs Department of the Jewish Council.
There, in the passage, amid all the gloom and bustle, I was able to read a few Rilke letters, to continue living my own life, despite the deadly fear I saw in all those faces. All those faces. My God, those faces. 21st of July. This afternoon, on my long walk home, when worries assailed me wildly and refused to go away, I suddenly said to myself, if you really believe in God, then you must surrender yourself completely and live in faith. Never worry about tomorrow. God, give me strength. Not only spiritual strength, but physical strength. I must make you a candid confession. If I have to leave this house, I shall be totally lost. But I don't want to worry about that in advance. Take these worries from me, please. For if I have to bear them as well as all the others, I shall scarcely be able to go on living. Living is not the sole meaning of life, Speer said when we discussed the problem of how to make sense of all that happens. The most depressing thing of all is that the mental horizon of the people I work with is so narrow. They don't even suffer deep down. They just hate and blind themselves to their own pettiness, their intrigue. They're still ambitious to get on. It's all a great big dirty mess. And there are moments when I would like to lay my head down on my typewriter and say in despair, I can't go on like this.
On the 22nd of July 1942, Etty volunteered to the Jewish Council for deportation to Western.
God save me from one thing. Don't let me be sent to a camp with the people with whom I now work every day. My heart failed a few times again today. But each time it came back to life. I say my goodbyes from minute to minute, shaking myself free of all outer things. I cut through the ropes that still hold me bound. I load up with everything I need to set out on my journey. I'm sitting now by a quiet canal, my legs dangling over the stone wall, and I wonder whether one day my heart will be so weary and worn that it'll no longer fly where it wants, free as a bird.
"16th of August, 1944. The air reeks of death. What is broadcast from abroad? That 5,000 officers have been shot. That the Nazis are murdering everybody, regardless of whether there is a connection with the assassination attempt. Yes, and shooting the family of the suspect at the same time they execute him. We breathe the air of death."
24th of July 1942. If all this suffering doesn't help us to attain a greater humanity by shedding all trifling and irrelevant issues, then it will all have been for nothing. The 25th of July. It's now 9:30 a.m. I want to sit here at this desk until noon. The rose petals lie scattered among my books. A yellow rose has opened as far as it can, and it now looks at me. The 2.5 hours I have left before work seem to me like a year's seclusion. There's a vast silence in me that continues to grow. Nothing can ever atone for the fact, of course, that one section of the Jewish population is helping to transport the majority out of the country. History will pass judgment in due course.
15th of September, the death sphere.
I love people so terribly, because in every human being, I love something of you, God. And I seek you everywhere in them, and often do find something of you. But now I need so much patience. And now I have to do everything by myself. For the best and the noblest part of my friend, of the man whose light you kindled in me, is now with you. I stood beside his bed and found myself standing before one of your last mysteries, my God. 1 a.m. I once thought, Spear, that I wanted to read your life up to and including the last page. And now I have done just that. There you lie now in your 2 small rooms, you dear, great, good man. I once wrote to you, my heart will always fly to you like a bird, from any place on earth, and it will surely find you. You have become so much a part of the heaven that stretches above me that I have only to raise up my eyes to be by your side. And even if they flung me into a dungeon, that piece of heaven would still spread out within me, and my heart would fly up to it. You are the mediator between God and me. And now you, the mediator, have gone. And my path leads straight to God. 22nd of September. This house, I feel, is slowly losing its hold on me. It's a good thing to be able to cut all ties with it. Very carefully, with great sorrow, but also in the certainty that it's all for the best, and there can be no other way. I let go, day by day. My latest treasure, the birds of the heavens and the lilies of the fields in Matthew 6, verse 33. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Let me just note down one more thing for myself. Matthew 6, verse 34. Take, therefore, no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. 4th of October, 1942. I so love being with people. It's as if my own intensity draws what's best and deepest right out of them. They open up before me, every human being, a new story told to me by life itself. And my eyes simply read on joyfully. Life has confided so many stories to me. I still have time. I shall be able to retell them to people who cannot read the book of life itself. It has been brought home forcibly to me how every atom of hatred added to the world makes it an even more inhospitable place. And I also believe that the earth will become more habitable again only through the love that the Jew Paul described to the citizens of Corinth in the 13th chapter of his first letter. I do not feel I have been robbed of my freedom. Essentially, no one can do me any harm at all.
October 1944. Arrests and more arrests. And on the 13th, a beautiful burning hot day in October, I was myself arrested. I was informed that I was charged with undermining the morale of the armed forces. The penalty for undermining the morale of the armed forces is the guillotine. The cell is 2 paces wide and 6 feet long, a concrete coffin equipped with a wooden pallet, and a barred window high up on the wall. By climbing onto the pallet, I can see a minuscule piece of the sky, the barracks compound, a section of the officer quarters, and behind, a pine forest. The pine forest of our lovely Bavarian plateau. On the walls, the inevitable obscenities. Then a veritable flood of Soviet stars, which gave the idea that the entire Red Army had been imprisoned here. And lastly, scratched into the concrete with the key, perhaps, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" I read this and darkness envelops me. This was written by a man as close to death as I am. Don't I know that the things that are happening to me now, the approach of death, the separation from my loved ones, the filth, the attempt to degrade me, that all these things will be required, even if I am not there to see it? A man need not be a Christian to know all this. But one must be a Christian to give form to this, and then heroically to live and die. In 1912, aboard an English coastal steamer, I theorized to the only other passenger, an old Chinese intellectual, that the whole of the world now found itself in a single vast agony. The venerable old man looked at me with amusement. Then he said quietly that Christianity still had before it its great and decisive task. I was deeply impressed by the way he spoke. Today, 30 years later, I know the thing is not so simple. Certainly, Christianity still has its great work before it. But in the face of the Satanism which now prevails, a second catacombs will be necessary, and a second Nero's burning of Rome, before the Spirit may emerge victorious a second time.
With those hard pews. We've got wine at the back and maybe even the odd soft drink. It would be wonderful if you stayed. And if you have any change, the proceeds of this reading will go in support of Ukraine. But I know that lots of you have probably already contributed, so please, one way or another, don't feel, whoops, in any way obliged. Thank you so much for coming.